Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is the president and CEO of Oxfam America, Abby Maxman. Abby, thanks so much for joining me.
It's great to be with you again, Brittany.
I'm really interested in hearing about a trip you took recently to the Middle East because back in October, President Trump, he declared that the war in Gaza was over and phase one of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas went into effect. In the 2 months that have followed since, it really seems like that ceasefire has been in a tenuous position. Both sides have accused the other of violating the deal. But you were recently in the West Bank. So to start off the conversation, what was the humanitarian situation on the ground there like?
Thanks, Brittany. Well, the humanitarian crisis isn't over in either the Gaza or the West Bank. Despite Israel's ending of mass bombardment and some aid being allowed in Gaza, the chokehold on Palestinians all across Gaza remains deadly, and across the West Bank as well, the chokehold is tightening more than ever. It's more than I've ever seen.
And why is that? How is that happening? Dive a little deeper in there for us.
Yeah, well, across the West Bank, we've seen, and I was at last there in the early 2024, and then I am just back, as you said. I have seen obstructions and obstacles being put up at every aspect of daily life for Palestinians. There is a systematic dehumanization of Palestinians across the West Bank and Gaza. When I was there, settler violence was at an extreme high, and over 1,000 blockades had been put off across the West Bank in the time since I had last been there. Just basic daily movements, ability to move, to travel, to live, to be able to go to your jobs, to do regular commerce. There's the opposite of an enabling environment. And we're seeing that over and over. Everyone I spoke with in Jenin, where I spoke with families who had lived in a refugee camp in Jenin for much of their life, and there had been destruction and violence, and they were displaced from the refugee camps. They are not allowed to go back in. They have nowhere to go, Brittany. Eight-member families living in a university dorm room, but it's temporary housing, and they have nowhere to go. What they do want now is the very low bar of going back to the refugee camps where people ran businesses, restaurants, had daily life, schools, education, all of that taken away. And this is happening all across the West Bank right now, while concurrently the fragile ceasefire in Gaza needs to hold. And what we're seeing there as well, just in the months since the ceasefire, over 350 people have been killed. We as Oxfam and our partners are unable to move goods, services, all of the needs, the surge of humanitarian goods, food, our ability to provide, repair water supplies and give people access to water and hygiene, just as it's winter and they're living in rubble in tents. We have $2.5 million of aid we've procured stuck on the outside of Gaza. That's part of $50 million worth of aid across others that is not allowed in. So we are not able to do our jobs anywhere near the scale that is needed.
So the issue obviously isn't if there's enough aid, because from what you're saying, it sounds like there is. The issue is that it can't get to the people who need it. So why is that issue arising? Is it that the aid workers themselves, like the staffers at Oxfam, they can't get through, or that the Palestinians can't get to you?
Well, it is a bit of a combination of right now, the Gaza Strip itself, it's basically there are very few points of entry, and there's only several rotations per week of staff that have to get approved and vetted by the Israeli authorities 2 weeks in advance, and they decide the night before who gets to go in, a maximum of 50 people twice a week to be allowed in to provide support and relief and oversight to our staff who have lived through 2 years now of bombardment. They've lost family members, they've lost homes, and we're trying to scale up what is required is a massive surge of humanitarian aid coming in. Now, we are procuring what we can inside the Gaza Strip, but it is nowhere near enough, and it's not allowing all of the goods, people, resources that we need to surge aid in to happen. The freedom of movement is blocked, and this is also across the West Bank. So I keep talking about both because the ceasefire in Gaza has to hold, but the enabling environment for us to be able to do our jobs at the scale needed is required, while concurrently this chokehold that we're seeing across the West Bank has been tightening.
I want to talk about the two separate areas. So first, when you're looking at Gaza, I mean, as you're saying, this ceasefire, that's very precarious. As of now, it's still in phase one. Hopefully it moves on to phase two and the phases after that. But I mean, Gaza was completely decimated the past couple of years in this war. So even if the ceasefire holds, I mean, when can normal life really resume here? I'm assuming not anytime soon.
Oh my goodness, absolutely not. Just thinking about if we just want to take the trauma that people live through, I have to say, Brittany, I am moved to tears every time I'm connecting with our team and staff in Gaza and our partners, because they even say, we don't know how we do it right now, but we get up every day because we have to rebuild. This daunting notion of rebuilding, just infrastructure, roofs over your head, basic nutrition, access to clean water, basic hygiene products, all of that is a huge amount of need, enormous. And we are not being allowed to bring aid in. We have had aid denied, new aid denied since March of this calendar year. We cannot get anything in. We get it denied for all sorts of reasons, or reasons that are not justified, because these are things like soap, food, water, things to help enable clean water, hygiene products are stuck outside, and all of this is being held. And we are, I would say, I'll use a term like drip feeding communities who need 2.2 million people, of which 1 million people, Palestinians in Gaza, have lost their homes. It is cold out. They're living in rubble, and in some way, recent rains caused, a flooding. Save the Children reported that people were waking up in sewage-soaked mattresses. This is the situation. We need to be able to do our jobs to help people begin this very, very first step of rebuilding and recovery. Now, it's a huge, long process, but we are nowhere near where we need to be at this juncture.
And is there any indication when Oxfam, your partners, perhaps other people providing aid, when they can get in there and give more?
Well, again, we continue to work through the systems and structures and mechanisms that are made available. We work with other organizations, work through all the normal coordination mechanisms to try to get our aid to be allowed in, and then our ability to do the jobs. We don't know. We continue to push. We use our voice. We talk to certainly anyone who has the ability to do this. Now, we know the U.S. government has a huge ability, is uniquely positioned to require the government of Israel to allow us to move our aid in. But the restrictions are suffocating, and we're not able to do what we need to anywhere near at this scale. And we continue to try, and we continue to face obstacle after obstacle after obstacle.
And we've seen before that other ceasefires during this war have been broken. Can the region, in your opinion, handle if this deal doesn't move past phase one and the ceasefire agreement breaks?
It's devastating to even imagine that. I think, it is hard when I describe that, we, how much suffering is going on, but still want to balance what a relief it is to have a ceasefire, however fragile, that the barrage of bombardment has stopped. However, as I said, as of earlier this week, there was over 350 Palestinians killed through violence and by Israeli defense forces in Gaza just since the ceasefire. So the killing hasn't stopped, but at the scale, the nightly trauma of bombardment, again, appreciate that. It's hard to imagine for anyone, ordinary Palestinians, and as I work with our Israeli and Palestinian human rights partners, to imagine the trauma of it breaking down. So what we really need with the utmost urgency is for that to hold and the ceasefire not to break down. And the US government can demand that we are allowed to get aid in, that this obstruction and chokehold is stopped, and that is a true permanent ceasefire. And we need to get Palestinian voices at the table, at the peace process table as well. They are not included, and they are being systematically dehumanized, both in Gaza and across the West Bank. And I know we'll talk about the West Bank a little bit more as well.
And let's talk about the West Bank now, actually. What are Palestinians saying there? Because you mentioned that you're seeing the chokehold in the West Bank as well.
Absolutely. It is certainly people displaced from their refugee camp homes. They don't have places to go. They're having to give up commerce and livelihoods and restaurants and the things they run, everyday livelihoods. Their kids not being able to go to school, and they're having to use their precious limited resources while losing income to try to find temporary housing, moving around, living in this dorm room of the university. Well, they also actually need to be able to pay the fees for keep their kids in university. And not only is it a basic needs issue, it is a constant dehumanization and humiliation. I talked to countless people who said to me, we just want to live in dignity and security. We do not want charity. And any human who has to say, please, can you explain that we are not terrorists? We just want to live our lives in dignity, freedom, and security. And as I was mentioning earlier, the 1,000, I experienced it myself. Now, I don't live it every day, but the 1,000 new roadblocks all across the West Bank means planning to be sitting for hours, to be blocked for hours when you're trying to go to your offices, to your jobs, to your businesses. I met with a Chamber of Commerce. It is it's a stranglehold on allowing Palestinians across the West Bank to live, to try to live independently and in dignity. And not to mention some of the other humiliations they face every day, and the struggle and the suffering. I was in a community of Betskaria where there have been a huge increase of illegal settlements, 160,000 families now living surrounding a few families who have held on in their ancestral homes and where they have always lived. And their kids see visibly this extreme inequality, that Israeli settlers have access to schools with everything they need, and their schools don't have what they need, and they're not even allowed to invest in them and improve them. And I talked to one mom who said, this is what breaks me when my kid asks, why can't I have what I need to go to school? I was with another woman who, while we were together and in that same community, and while she was there having conversations with us, her husband was in his fields, and he had been evicted from his fields, and she had to race out of the meeting to talk to him because he had been evicted and the settler violence was increasing. So this violence with impunity needs to stop. And again, the US government can demand the government of Israel to stop this violence happening all across the West Bank, and that continues to slow burn in Gaza.
The entire world has seen the images coming out of this region, especially in the last couple of years, and they've been heartbreaking. They've been video images. It's really hard to watch. But as someone who was on the ground there, as someone who communicates and works with people on the ground, both in the West Bank and Gaza, what do you think is missing from the international dialogue surrounding this humanitarian crisis?
Well, at the moment now, and this is a strange situation to be in, now that it's the bombing, the daily destruction is not in the headlines, there might be a lack of realization that the humanitarian crisis is not over. And so there's this disconnect, and I'm so grateful that you're bringing attention, and we continue to bring attention to this, because people and policymakers and member states, everybody needs to recognize, even if little bits of aid are getting into Gaza, it is a drop in the ocean of need for the rebuilding and reconstruction and basic needs that need to be addressed. Similarly, across the West Bank, it's happening all over in broad daylight, the humiliation, the blockade, the chokehold. And so this needs to be considered. We need the permanent ceasefire. We need to make sure Palestinian voices are at the table. And we need to be able to have unfettered humanitarian access at a scale that is nowhere near what is being allowed right now.
I think you brought up a really interesting point, because it seems like President Trump said the war is over, and it's kind of like, that's wrapped up in a pretty little bow. Obviously, on the ground, that is not the case at all. There's the destruction and devastation and rubble of 2 years of continued fighting. What do you think that the United States government needs to do now, and what do you think the likelihood of that happening really is?
Well, President Trump has unique, enormous power and control in what happens. So we look to him to maintain, to insist, to demand a permanent ceasefire, unimpeded aid access, an end to the blockade and the illegal Israeli occupation, and also justice and accountability, this operating with impunity, the continuing of breaking these ceasefire on a daily basis, over 350 people killed. Half of them, I believe, are children. And, the death toll has already been over 70,000 people. And in just a couple months, 350. Now, he needs to require it. He can. He has the ability, the power, the authority over this process to require and hold those who are violating it accountable.
Abby, I really appreciate the conversation. And as we see updates as to aid getting into this region, I hope you can come back on and join me. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Brittany.